All right, we're here with one Mr. David Page. David, how are you today?
I'm great. How are you? Thanks for
I'm
having
good.
me.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this. And man, you've had quite a life, it seems like.
I try to stay busy.
That sounds like an understatement, a lot of it to
Well,
me.
every few years I feel the need to reinvent my career, so
Mm,
it keeps things interesting.
yeah, I would imagine so. I mean, after looking through your bio and stuff, and I was like, wow, this person's been a lot of places, seen a lot of things. And I was struck by the Berlin Wall deal. Why is that? Because I lived in Germany during that time.
How's that?
I used to live in
Where?
Germany and Nuremberg.
Where? Oh, Nuremberg. I was based out of Frankfurt.
Yeah, I was born in
Yeah.
Frankfurt area,
Ah,
actually.
military?
Military,
Yeah.
yes. Yeah. And we have a piece of the Berlin Wall at my parents' house.
I don't, and I was there the night it all started.
You were there, you and David Hasselhoff, apparently, right? Like,
Apparently.
I mean, that had to be an incredible experience for you.
It was remarkable because you just didn't see it coming.
Mm,
Understand something. Uh, Nightly News, NBC Nightly News, decided to broadcast from the Brandenburg Gate at that point because, and I had followed the collapse of communism that amazing year from country to country. And the pressure was now on East Germany because it had become an alternative route out from Czechoslovakia and such. So clearly, the place to bring the show over and do a big deal on the whole situation was Berlin. But we clearly helped create the party atmosphere that
mhm.
night. To light the Brandenburg Gate requires some pretty powerful lighting instruments. So we had basically created a scene that could have felt like Disneyland in the first place. Then, shortly before the evening newscast began, a cameraman came running into the trailer we were using as an office, yelling that they're coming out. I said, "What's coming out?" He said, "The East Berliners, that they're streaming into the West." Now, it wasn't happening at Checkpoint Charlie, which was the American crossing. I think it was
Right.
the British crossing. I didn't believe him. I said, "Peter, that's impossible." He re-racked the tape and played it through his viewfinder, and yeah, it was possible. It tracked back to a relatively innocuous statement that an East German government representative had made in a news conference earlier that day about people are free to leave, which is the sort of yes, we're democratic thing that you heard from East Berlin all the time.
Right.
This time it was a bit different.
Wow. I mean, that's amazing. And then somehow food has been a part of all of these adventures. It seems
Well,
like.
when I moved, I had not considered living internationally. I was a
Yeah.
typical American, and then I got a phone call from at my NBC desk in Chicago, and somebody on the other end said, "Do you have any interest in moving to London?" And I thought, "Oh, that'd be cool." At which point they said, "Okay, you're one of two candidates." I'm thinking, don't tell me that. Tell me when you
Right.
decide. Anyway, after an agonizing couple of weeks, I got the gig. I moved to London, and from there to Frankfurt, and from there to Budapest, um, and began to experience all sorts of countries and cultures I had never really thought about visiting. I was, as I look back on it, as landlocked an American as you can get, real proud that I'd been all across this country.
Hmm.
But the idea of visiting other countries just wasn't a reality. Now I'm over there, I'm going from country to country about which I've known nothing in the past. And it becomes apparent that the gateway to a society is its food, both in an understanding of its locale, its history, people eating what is grown in a particular area. And also, let's face it, food, sitting down to eat together, is the great social lubricant.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful thing that we as human beings have done for millennia. Um, and I got to do that. Although I'll tell you a funny story. First time I was in Vienna, I said to the locals who we would have help us out on each trip, the same group of guys. And I said, "Hey, I've never been to Vienna before, so when we're done with this story, would you take me where you guys go to eat?"
Yeah.
And I'm thinking going to get schnitzel or something. They took me to an American barbecue joint.
Yeah. It's funny. I've experienced that too, in a sense. I was opening a fitness club in Malaysia many years ago, and I'd never been there. And I said, "Oh, we should go to, get some really great Malaysian food." It's a very eclectic society, and they wanted to go to like Papa John's, and they wanted to go to like Johnny Rocket. I'm like, "Why would you eat this? Like, why do you want this?"
Well,
like,
it's American food. Look at that.
American food. Yeah.
Well, and it's interesting because so many of our foods, well, some of our foods, especially pizza, are being sent back to the rest of the world after being Americanized and are seen in other countries as American food. The pizza folks stream to American pizza chains internationally,
Right.
but not for Italian pizza. It's for American pizza.
Wow, that's incredible. I mean, and I read that you were eating some interesting food before meeting Yasser Arafat, I believe.
Oh, we were at the time the PLO was still considered a terrorist organization. We were trying to interview Arafat.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of ritual you have to go through before he sits down and talks. You have to have a meal, and you never know when it's going to happen. So he calls us. I don't know. We were called at like 2 or 3 in the morning. Ended up at a long table with him at one end, and my crew and correspondent and a number of his hangers-on around the table. And that was back in the day when you did not say the word Israel in front of anyone from the PLO.
Yeah.
The closest they would come to acknowledging Israel's existence was to refer to the Zionist entity. We all had 2 passports, one for all over the world and the other one just for Israel. Because if you use your main passport and it got stamped in or out of Israel, it was not going to be worth anything in most of the rest of the Arab world. Anyway, we're sitting at the table, and there's a basket of fruit in the middle of the table, and our sound man suddenly, and everyone's talking, it's a pleasant meal. Our sound man suddenly reaches out, grabs something out of the fruit basket, and exults, "Oh, look, blood oranges. I haven't had one of those since I was in Israel."
Oh.
The entire table comes to a halt, kind of like the old commercials for that brokerage house. There was, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 seconds of complete silence, and then everyone continued talking as if that had never happened.
Right. Was that a surreal situation to be in?
That was a little bizarre. Well, no, it's a little bizarre, but there are things when you're carrying the credentials of a major American news organization, you get access to an awful lot of things. I mean, Arafat would talk to the Western media when it was in his interests to talk to the Western media. We knew that. So yes, the first time you do something like that, you kind of go, "I can't believe this is happening." But from that point on, it's doing your job.
Yeah, I would imagine. If you're doing it regularly, you're going to start becomes, you can get used to a lot of things.
Yeah, well, you don't want to get jaded.
Yeah.
Because then you start to look at things from this rather superior point of view. You don't want to do that.
Yeah.
But it is, something you would do on a regular basis.
Sure. Definitely. So where's talking about food, writing about food, producing shows about food, where did that come from? Has that been something you had always loved?
It was complete happenstance.
No, really?
Yeah. I mean, look, I've always liked to eat. Moving internationally really whet my appetite, to make a terrible pun, of interest in different kinds of foods and the quality of foods and how food is made and presented. But I had no particular intention of getting into food journalism. When I came back to the States, I was a show producer for NBC News, then ABC News. Then I left and eventually attempted to go out on my own as a production company. And a production company can either be what mine eventually turned into, which is a bricks and mortar operation with
Hmm.
dozens of employees, or it can be what it was when I initially declared myself a production company, which is a guy with a cell phone with a recorded message that says, "You've reached Page Productions." I pitched shows for quite a while, got nowhere, was concerned about starving, speaking of food,
Right.
and I called a friend of mine, Al Roker, who is a main character
Hmm.
on the Today Show. Back earlier, he had been on my show, the Weekend Today Show, before he had moved up to the main show. And he also had a production company. I called him up. I said, "Hey, Al, you got any work?" And he said, "Yeah, I'm doing a lot of stuff for the Food Network. You want to take some of it on?" So I did. And eventually he was subcontracting hour-long programs to me, including one on the history of diners. When I eventually moved on, uh, in the realization that to make a success of my company, I was going to have to sell directly, I started pitching the Food Network a lot, and they started saying no consistently.
Yeah.
I couldn't I couldn't get them interested in anything until one day I was on the phone with the executive whose life I kept ruining by calling, and out of frustration, she finally said to me, "Don't you have anything else about diners?" And I
Mm.
said, "Oh, yeah, I've been developing this show called Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives." Told her a little about it, and she said, that sounds interesting. It was late on a Thursday or a Friday. She said, "We have a development meeting on Tuesday. Get me a write-up on Monday." I hung up the phone, and now I had a problem because no, I had not been developing anything called Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives. I had just created the title, pulled it out of thin air or a body part, depending
Wow.
upon how you want to picture the situation. I spent the weekend calling people. We actually made phone calls in those days. It wasn't
Yes.
email. Called a lot of people, and by the end of the weekend, I had a write-up for a 1 hour special called Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives. Much to my surprise, not that long after, they picked it up. And that was the real beginning of me as a food journalist.
Wow. That was the start. That show, unbelievable.
The need to eat.
The need to eat. And, it's such a popular show that so many people have watched the incredible amount of seasons. And how did one Mr. Guy Fieri become associated with this show? Uh,
Well, when they said let's do a special, I said, "Okay, you want me to suggest some hosts?" And they said, "No, we got the guy we want you to use. His name is
mm,
Guy Fieri. He just won the Food Network Star Contest, and we're trying to get him established in prime time." So I said, "Okay," and I went, and I'd never heard of the Food Network Star Contest. I had no
yeah.
idea who Guy Fieri was. I went to my computer and I Googled Guy Fieri, and I pretty much had a heart attack. Here's this
Really?
spiky haired guy in short pants and flip flops. And I thought to myself, I'm screwed.
Oh,
Because I hadn't seen his work. Now,
yeah.
it quickly became apparent to me when we started talking, and more so when we started shooting, that while Guy was incredibly green and had a ton to learn, he was able to soak it up like a sponge. And he was probably the most naturally talented TV performer I've ever come across. He was
Mm.
born with it. But no, I didn't ask for Guy. I didn't know who he was. And when I first saw him, I thought, this is a terrible idea.
It's funny, these stories behind the scenes of something that's
Yeah,
popular, like everybody associates, oh, you just hear, hey, everybody, welcome to Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives. You're like, oh, that voice, the sound, the hair. And you think, oh,
it's
this is bad idea. You're thinking,
things happen. Who knows? William Goldman, who won 2 Oscars screenwriting in Hollywood, he did Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, which
yeah.
was his favorite, and he did All the President's Men, which, despite the Oscar, he says they changed the script on. Anyway, he's a legendary Hollywood scriptwriter, or was. He's passed away. He's script doctor on a bunch of stuff. His rule of Hollywood in terms of whether or not something is going to succeed, why people greenlight something, why something doesn't or does do well. Goldman's rule is, and I quote, "No one knows anything."
It's pretty simple.
Yeah.
I mean, well, when did you know like that show had some real legs to stand on?
Well, after the second, well, the special did well,
Yeah.
and then the production companies, the big boys, that they had commissioned to present pitches for a real primetime show for Guy. I mean, I was filling
You were just
time
taking up
and
space.
keeping him on the air a bit. The pitches from those big production companies came in, and the network didn't like them. So they kind of were between a rock and a hard place. They had a talent they wanted to maximize. This was back in the day when the Food Network actually believed that the Food Network star competition would generate a new generation
Sure.
of stars. Guy is still the only one who's made it, but
Yeah.
they really needed to keep his face on the air, they thought. So out of desperation, they commissioned a short first season of Diners. After the first two episodes did remarkably well, one of the executives said to me, "Look, this is great, but understand there aren't enough restaurants in America for this to have legs. So, if we're lucky, we'll get a second season. If we're really lucky, we'll get a third." Well, I did the first 11 seasons. They're now in season 30 something. So I refer you back to Goldman's rule.
Not enough restaurants. I mean, there's a ton of restaurants. I mean, it's unbelievable.
Yeah, I think, look, when it first began, I think there was a tendency, and I was involved in this too, to think of the title too specifically, to think that if there wasn't an actual diner
Right.
in each show, we were failing to fulfill our mandate, when in fact the audience understood that it was an umbrella title, that what
Right.
it meant was we're going to take you to legitimate, authentic, mostly mom and pop run joints where you're going to meet some good people and see some good food. I think the audience caught on to that before we
Yeah.
did.
Yeah. And I think, what's interesting is it's one of those shows like you can just play it nonstop. It just keeps going. It was kind of the original binging in some ways of shows. You could just constantly play show to show to show, take you from city to city. And I wonder, like, how did you come up with where you would go actually?
Well, two ways. Number one, understand that everything in television, in the final analysis, is a budgetary choice. Okay. So one of the constraints of how we shot the show was we needed in every instance to shoot in a geographic location
Right.
that gave us access, if possible, to more than one state and certainly to more than one city, so that as we stockpiled these things and we would shoot 4 segments at a time, we had enough diversity to checkerboard over the season and be a little bit of everywhere. Right off the bat, that was one of the defining rules of where we could go. Secondarily, it's just footwork. It's a matter of once you've figured out where you want to go, calling, yes, the telephone, anybody in that town with an expertise in food, the food reporters for the local paper. Back then, there were local papers.
Right.
The food writer for the local magazine or the critic on the radio station, and Googling anything that had ever been written about the restaurants in question. Once a restaurant seemed possible, then it was time for several extremely detailed interviews with them about how they make what they make and why they do what they do. And in that interview also was an opportunity to assess the TV personality of the chef.
Right.
If the chef wasn't going to have some kind of life. It doesn't have to be humorous, but it's got to be an engaged, passionate person, or TV doesn't work. In its most basic definition, TV is friendly voyeurism.
Yeah.
It's the opportunity to jump into the screen and hang out with someone you like hanging out with, which is Guy. But whoever he's hanging out with has to be part of that crowd too. So we would work backwards from there, and our standards were extraordinarily high. I mean, I live on a tourist island on the Jersey Shore with a restaurant extremely well known for their pancakes. I thought that'd be good to put on.
Right.
I went and visited them, and their pancake mix, they don't make their own mix.
Oh
It's out
no.
of a box.
Oh no.
So, no, I can't
No.
do that. We made pancakes at a diner in St. Paul, Minnesota, where their pancake batter is made in house, and that was great. That was wonderful. But a lot of places that might seem terrific at first glance are not.
Mm.
And we were very good at making these decisions from a distance, but about 5% of the time when we got there on the road, we would determine that this ain't going to cut it
Yeah.
and would politely leave. And the network thought I was crazy because I ate that money. They didn't.
Right. Right.
But part of generating the audience that we generated was, I think, the intrinsic truthfulness of the show.
Yeah. I mean, that's amazing. What did you learn about yourself in doing that show for 11 years, or what? How did you
It was
grow?
11 seasons. That was
11
3 or 4
seasons.
years.
Sorry. Yeah. What did you
Um,
learn the most about that time?
I learned a hell of a lot about food,
Yeah.
and I had the opportunity to learn a number of creative techniques. This is going to bore the audience, but I think I was able to push the envelope in some ways on how you cut together this sort of program in a way that keeps it moving
Yeah.
and yet accurate. I mean, one of the things we ended up doing is to really bring someone inside a cinematic universe. People don't realize that in some respects, the most important element is the sound, not the pictures,
Right.
because your ears can tell when things are changing or not right. We literally spent 23 hours for every 30-minute episode in audio sweetening to make sure that every time a fork hit a plate, you heard it. That sort of thing. I think that actually made a big psychological difference to
Hmm.
viewers. They didn't know it, but I think it helped a lot.
Wow. And so now that I'm thinking about watching this show, I'm like, oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, when you see
You
on that
know,
show, I mean, I don't know what they do now, but when a hamburger is put on a grill with a
hmm
spatula, the first thing you hear is the metal of the
that's
spatula
right.
hitting the grill. The next thing you hear is the sizzle of the burger as it starts to cook. The third thing you hear is the scrape of the spatula as it leaves. All of those little elements are important, and not, well, most shows don't bother.
Right. I mean, it's very detailed work.
Yeah,
Obviously,
it's expensive too.
I would imagine so.
Yeah.
Did you become a better cook after all of this?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
But
Right.
understand, I've always been a talented, eager, absolute amateur.
I
See,
see.
I don't have the gene that real chefs have to
Mm.
just know stuff. I mean, I can't tell you the number of chefs I've interviewed who in the middle of a sentence will turn around and make an adjustment to what they're cooking just because they knew it was time to do that.
Right.
I'm the guy who still has to cut open, who makes for 3 people. I'll make 4 steaks, so I have the
Yeah.
4th one to cut open and see if it's ready.
Right. There you go. Oh my goodness, amazing. So when you were doing that show, what was you clearly after 11 seasons you moved on. What was
Mhm.
that like for you? That process of moving on from it?
It was a business decision.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
it's television. I gave birth to my baby,
That's right.
had the joy of running it the way I wanted, and then it was time to do something else, which turned
Mhm.
out to be a craft beer show.
Oh my gosh, I love craft beer. That's
Yeah, well, I
incredible.
found out the hard way shooting the pilot that Belgian triple means triple the alcohol.
It's very serious ABV going on there.
Yeah, yeah. We shot the pilot at Cambridge Brewing Company, Cambridge Brewing Company
Hmm.
in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And they make some absolutely deadly Belgian ales.
Are we talking like 12%,
15,
13%,
15.
15?
Yeah, yeah,
Oh
insane.
my gosh. And I
Yeah,
love
it's
high
insane.
ABV beers, but
Well,
that's
yeah,
up there.
but you shouldn't guzzle them like we did on that shoot.
Guzzle them?
Yeah, there was a lot of damage the next morning. That's ask me what I learned on the beer show. That's what I learned.
What was the show? What was
It
it
was
called?
called Beer Geeks.
Beer Geeks.
It starred Michael Ferguson,
Mhm.
one of the most important brewmasters in the craft brew world, who's an incredible talent. And we did 26 or 27 episodes where in each show we would go to a particular brewery. In the first two acts, we would make one or more beers. In the third act, we would cook with beer at a
Mm.
restaurant that was one of their customers. And then in the fourth act, we would at that restaurant have a pairing dinner, which
Wow.
was very proud of that series. It was terrific.
Wow.
There was a problem getting mainstream brewers, the big boys,
Hmm.
to support the show with advertising because at that time, before they started buying up all the craft breweries, they saw them as competition.
Oh, so these
Yeah.
are like your Anheuser Busches and things like
I
that.
will
Yeah.
name no names, but
I said it.
yeah,
Okay, everyone.
yeah, yeah. And by the way, one thing people don't realize, the big boys, like let's use Anheuser-Busch as an
Hmm.
example, have on staff and produce some of the technically finest brewers in the world. The
Hmm.
ability that those guys have to produce, let's say, basic Budweiser
Right.
at multiple locations across the United States in incredible volumes and maintain identical taste and quality is amazing. And a number of those guys, when you go to big name craft breweries, like I think we were at Stone and their chief
Oh
brewer
yeah.
had come from Anheuser-Busch. I mean,
Wow.
it's it ain't easy.
I would never guess that.
Yeah.
At
No,
places
it's
like.
not like there's two paths of
Yeah.
brewers and
Yeah.
here's the crafty guys on this side. No,
Yeah.
brewing is a science. I mean, it's also an art,
Yeah.
obviously. I mean, we spent time at New Belgium in
Yeah.
Denver, where their chief taster, she was amazing, and she would mix different aging barrels together to create a beer, and this boiled down entirely to her nose. That
Whoa.
was astonishing. That
What?
was because remember when beers age in wood barrels,
Hmm.
they develop different flavors to a great extent. A, based on the wood, but B, based on the bacteria, the natural bacteria that gets in and funks around with the beers. So to create a final beer, you use beers from different barrels with different flavor uh, characteristics,
Right.
and no computer can do that. This was a young woman just saying, "There you go, that's a beer." It was pretty remarkable.
That is remarkable. That's absolutely mind blowing. And to think about beer and food and the explosion of shows now that exist that have all those things. What are your,
Well, look,
you know?
we have as a society, I think, developed a true interest in stretching our palates. But let's also be clear, as a society, for many people, this is the latest hip cool thing to do.
Right.
And
Right.
tomorrow it might be unicycles. So there are different crowds expressing interest in food and beer.
Yeah.
There is a strata of that rock that's in it for the hip factor. And then there are those who are in it because it's really important.
Yeah. Did you, is there a percentage of that, or
No,
did you
I'm not
see
going to go
just,
there. They
no?
they said, to quote Chevy Chase on the initial season of SNL when he was playing President Ford, they said there would be no math.
I like that. Well, so this all seems like it vaults into Food Americana here.
Yes.
And tell me a little bit about the book and why'd you write it? What is this, a culmination of your experiences?
Well, you got to understand every TV producer wants to write a book.
Mm,
Producing television, the writing that you do, and it's very hard to do this. People don't give it the respect it deserves, but you're writing to be invisible. You're
hmm,
writing to slowly push viewers to the next audio visual experience. You're tying pieces together. If you do it right, you're servicing the pictures and spoken words. That's different than the freedom to sit down and tell a narrative story starting with "It was a dark and stormy night."
yeah.
Um, so every TV producer wants to do a book. Secondly, there is a luxury in doing a book of much more real estate than you'll ever get on TV. You can take a subject to a deeper place. You can jam in more information. And ever since I moved to Europe and worked in Europe, Africa, and the Middle East, and then came back to the States and created diners, my interest in foods and foodways simply continued to grow. And at one point, I finally said to myself, it's time to sit down and do it. So I did. Now, what I didn't realize as a first time author is that I chose to feature basically a dozen or so foods or cuisines as part of the American cuisine.
Hmm.
What I didn't realize is, thus, I had a dozen chapters. I didn't really think it through, but each of those chapters then ended up requiring almost as much research as a full book would have, because you do have to know what you're talking about.
Hmm.
So the researching and writing took 2 years, and it's out now, doing very well. The reviews are quite good. Basically, what I discuss in there is, in a nation of immigrants, how we created a unique American cuisine out of the cuisines of so many other countries and cultures. Everything from pizza to fried chicken to sushi. I mean, sushi is now as American as you can get.
Oh my goodness, yes.
Yeah, the one of the top executives at the company that produces the most prepackaged sushi in America, they have what they call sushi robots
Hmm.
that mechanically do most of it on an assembly line.
Wow.
She explained to me that when she was in high school, if she and her friends ran off to grab a quick lunch, it was burgers. Her kids today, they'll do the same thing, but it's with sushi.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Is it
Now,
absolutely
we
incredible?
modify these dishes
Yeah.
to our tastes, to our palate, to make use of ingredients we have here, to replace ingredients that we don't have. I mean, obviously, deep fried sushi is not something you're going to find in Japan,
Oh,
but but in some places in Japan today, you will find a California roll
kind of crazy.
invented here, and then it made its way back there
Remix
as an
back there.
American oddity.
Yeah.
What's interesting about the California roll is people assume that because it has no raw fish in it, it was invented for Americans. There's a huge debate among food historians, many of whom say it was in fact invented for Japanese customers during a time of year when fatty tuna was simply unavailable
Hmm.
seasonally, and the chef chose avocado for the mouthfeel and fat content that would replace the tuna.
Wow. It's crazy. All the information you don't know about, but you think you know. I mean, that's pervasive in a lot of subjects and topics, but the behind the scenes, behind the curtain aspect of that. Did you learn even more about everything you knew about food? Did you feel like, wow, learning this, how to get all this information and write this book even enhanced your ability to know about
Oh,
food?
yeah. Well, the great thing about the only way to be a journalist is if you're naturally curious.
Right.
Otherwise, it's drudgery, it's research, it's like cramming for a history test.
Yeah.
No, this was an incredible opportunity to learn an amazing amount that I simply did not know about so much of our American food. I mean, lox and bagels, the quintessential New
Mm-hmm.
York Jewish food. I'm Jewish and from New York, was not eaten by Jews in Europe. They
Oh,
didn't have lox. They had smoked fish, which they did not put on bagels.
yeah.
Lox and bagels only came to be in the United States after the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad made it possible to ship salmon from Seattle to New York.
Hmm.
But there was no refrigeration back then. And the only way to get the salmon to New York without rotting was to pack it in salt. Well, salt brine salmon
Yep.
is lox. That's where lox came from. And, somebody said, hey, let's put it on a bagel. And then a guy in upstate New York failed in an attempt to recreate French Neufchâtel cheese.
Mhm.
And what he came up with was called cream cheese, which was perfect to cut the saltiness of the lox. There you go. The world's perfect sandwich was born
Crazy.
again by a series of random events.
Does it feel like that's how a lot of things come
Sure.
to be? Yeah, you know.
Sure, of course. Um, and so, look, so much of food is born of necessity.
Mm,
Uh, chicken wings were never the preferred part of a chicken, but if you were poor and African American, or white in the South,
sure.
but the poverty more often affected African American families. And on a Sunday, the preacher came because the preacher in the South would go from family to family after service every Sunday on a rotating basis. And when the preacher came over, you would serve a chicken, which was called the preacher bird. Well, he got the first piece. Mom and dad got the next. By the time I got down the table to the kids, it was wings and feet.
Yeah. Amazing.
Yeah.
The history of our food and all things. It's
You know where fried chicken came from?
where did it come from?
Well, you tell me.
I don't know where it came from. Honestly,
Okay.
I feel like it's.
It
I
is
feel
a
like it's a southern thing, but I don't
Yeah.
know.
Well, it's a combination of the foodways of Scottish immigrants
Come on.
and enslaved Africans who did have some history of frying in Africa, but more to the point, implemented their preferred taste profile.
Scottish immigrants.
Yeah,
I
they
mean,
had
who
fried
would know
chicken.
that? Who would know
Well, I didn't know it before I started to
that?
research the book, but yeah, Scottish immigrants.
I mean, that I'm not sure a lot of people would know that
Yeah, it's
information. I mean, it's
sort of a hidden fact.
I would fried chicken in Scotland.
Now, hey, listen, they like haggis.
That's true.
Which, by the way, is damn good.
It is good actually. If done the right way, it's very good.
Well, but again, we're back to food of the poor. Virtually every culture has some food very high in fat and calories, and usually made inside an internal piece
Like a
of the
casing or
animal.
something, yeah.
Like in Jewish Eastern European tradition, we have something called kishka, which
Mm-hmm.
is fat and grain in stuffed derma. What's derma? I think it may be stomach. Anyway,
Mm.
these were all ways to provide affordable energy
Yeah.
to poor people in the morning as they were going to go out and work the fields.
Yeah.
And again, so much of what we eat came from poverty. I mean, you pay $60 for a lobster today in a restaurant, but when the explorers and settlers came over here and saw lobsters, they had no idea what to do with them.
Yeah.
And it was Native American culture that stepped in, and the Native Americans taught them to wrap the lobsters in seaweed and throw them on a fire.
That's amazing.
which is today something you see in the continued existence of the New England clam bake.
Yeah. I think of something like Scrapple, like,
Oh, Scrapple's a perfect
right?
example.
It's a great
Scrapple, yeah,
example of that.
it's we're squeamish in this country
Yeah.
about offal, the interior organs of animals, which have long been a standard part of virtually every culture's diet, because when you have no money, you don't throw anything out. It's fascinating. I was taken to a huge Chinese food court in Queens, a borough of New
Mm-hmm.
York, by a couple of Chinese immigrant students. And this was before COVID, this massive food hall, every stand in it was selling food intended for Chinese, not Anglo Americans,
Right.
because we're finally at the point where there's enough of a Chinese population in the United States from recent immigration that you can actually have a business with the target clientele being Chinese, as opposed to Americans who want beef and broccoli and General Chow's chicken.
Yeah.
The food sold, and there's nothing wrong with either of those,
No.
as
Yeah.
part of Chinese American cuisine, which is a different cuisine than you'll find in
True.
China. It was created here. But this hall was filled with food as served and eaten in China.
Mm.
And it was just terrific. And some of it was familiar, hand pulled noodles, dumplings, even a fascinating breakfast crepe in which two crepes sandwich a crunchy piece of crepe. Phenomenal, but also in many instances awful.
Hmm.
Uh, I had what's called dry pot, which is a very spicy concoction of
Mm-hmm.
various ingredients that you pick like you're at Chipotle. Only here you're picking from artery and gizzard and duck blood and tripe
Mm.
and tendon and other things that are obviously less extreme to the American palate. But I got to tell you, it was fantastic. I mean, I wish I
Really?
didn't know the duck blood was blood,
Right.
but it tasted sort of like a metallic liverwurst. And
Huh.
I'm one of the four people in America who likes liverwurst. So,
Four people.
but the
Yeah.
point is, I don't know how much of that authentic food. I
Mm.
just used a word I hate to use.
You don't like authentic? You don't like
Authentic's a bad word.
it's a bad.
It implies that there's real food and unreal food,
Oh, I
and
see.
even in China, as in any country, the cuisine continues to develop. I mean,
Right.
one of the most popular dishes in China today is scrambled eggs and tomatoes.
Oh my, really?
Yeah, every cuisine continues to change. Uh, the point I was making inarticulately, though, was I don't know how far Americans will go in adopting Chinese, some of the more seemingly extreme Chinese dishes. Although there's a whole movement called Chinese 2.0,
Hmm.
in which young chefs are trying to do more with ingredients and meals as served today in China, and are also in some cases trying to channel the soul of that and those flavors in a way that is perhaps more palatable for many Americans. Although there's a restaurant in the book that's across the street from the University of Indiana in Bloomington, which has two menus, has an American Chinese menu and a Chinese menu,
Ah,
and because there's a lot of Chinese immigrant students at Indiana,
hmm.
and the owner, who comes from, I don't know if it's Hong Kong or the mainland. I had a brain meltdown. He says, some of the Americans, they'll try
Yeah.
what's on the Chinese menu, and if they don't want to, I've got beef and broccoli.
Yeah. There you go. Wow. So does this change your how you look at food after all this time? How you approach it?
It has re-emphasized to me my core belief, which is don't go into a chain restaurant.
Oh my! I'm with
Please
you.
don't go in and let them put some plastic reheatable
Oof.
stuff in a microwave. It has reinforced my belief that the best food is honest food made fresh by someone who gives a damn. The giving a damn part is incredibly important. There's a reason this is called the service industry.
Mm.
Successful restaurateurs are people who really want to make customers happy. And a bunch of them got wiped out during the pandemic.
Yeah.
So, which is a shame. Those are the places I want to eat.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting that you said, like no chain restaurants. I'm like, man, I've been saying that for years. Like we don't.
Now, let me
you know.
be clear. I'm not going to shoot you if you go to In-N-Out,
Sure.
because that's fresh made in front of you, and it's
Yeah.
pretty good.
Actually, I love In-N-Out, but that's like one of the only places.
Well,
I've, like, really been
and
into.
plus, I don't know if In-N-Out is as good as I think it is, or if I think it's that good only because I live on the East Coast and I can't get it here. So
Right.
when I go to the West Coast, my friends and I end up late at night sitting on the hood of the car jamming doubles animal style into our faces. So, but you can't even take. Look, it's fresh beef. I know that. You can't taste the beef by the time you get that thing in your mouth.
And the French fries too. They're not as they're way
amazing.
different than other French fries. Yeah, they're way different.
There's something about it. Now. Is it like Coors beer that when you can get it in the East, it's not special anymore? I don't know. I just remember when I was in college in Oklahoma that it was a really big deal to my friends for me to smuggle a 6-pack of Coors back East.
Really?
Oh, yeah. You couldn't get Coors. And I don't like Coors. But back then, because you couldn't get it, and because Paul Newman was always seen drinking it after a race, it was the cool thing to have.
Yeah.
And by the way, so much of food is about perception.
Yeah, that's true.
That's
very true.
If I blindfolded you, could you tell the various fried chicken sandwiches apart? I don't know.
I don't know, honestly.
I'll tell you one thing you can't tell. In the average hamburger with condiments on it, you're gonna have a hell of a time telling me if that burger was frozen or fresh.
Interesting.
I explored that with a number of food scientists who acknowledge that technically speaking, if you have two burgers sitting next to each other with nothing on them and one was frozen and one was fresh ground, you could tell the difference. But that once you start to put condiments on it and put it in a bun, good luck telling me which was which.
It's hard to decipher between then at that point.
And there's nothing inherently wrong with frozen beef. I mean, it's like, there was a great. Did you ever watch Mad Men?
Yes.
Okay. The episode where he's trying to write a slogan for the cigarette brand,
right?
And he says to the guy who owns the company, "Well, tell me about it." He says, "We do this, we do that, then we toast it, then we do this." And John Hamm stops him and says, "That's it. That's the tagline. It's toasted." And the cigarette guy says, "They're all toasted." And Hamm says, "But nobody knows that."
Right.
That there are certain things that sell a product, and that's fine.
Yeah. And this other thing is like learning also about how well food is prepared behind the scenes when you don't see it in front of you being prepared. Sometimes it could be horrifying to know how your food is being handled.
Well, look, it depends. There's one thing was always a problem on diners, which is an absolutely sanitary, clean commercial kitchen looks like crap to the average viewer because all of the pans from use have blackened.
Yeah.
And there are sections of the stove that are reflecting their wear and their use.
Yeah.
And the average individual doesn't understand that that's cooking.
Yeah.
So when we would go into a restaurant, we would actually replace some of the pans if need be with fresh ones and make these guys clean up beyond anything necessary, because to folks at home it looks terrible.
Right.
It's not
TV, right? I mean, you got to make it look good.
Well,
right?
yeah. I mean,
on
look,
some level,
you got to make the food appealing.
Yeah.
You gotta. There's things you have to do.
Right. Most definitely. Well, I got to tell you, David, this is amazing information and a real pleasure to speak with you.
Well,
And
pleasure on my part. I
yeah,
look, I care deeply about this book. I'm very proud of this book. I've been a journalist for 51 years now.
wow,
And this is, as far as I'm concerned, the best thing I've done.
wow,
I'm very happy to tell a story about something so vital to our lives through the stories of people who do it and have done it. The people who own these restaurants that have been there forever. It's a good feeling.
yeah. I would imagine it has to be, and I think the audience is going to love hearing about all these stories. Storytelling is amazing. You tell some amazing stories, and
Thank you.
yeah, no problem. And I look forward for a lot of people to check this out. So, Mr. David Page, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And can I plug the name of the book again?
Please, let's get
Food
it done.
Americana. It's available at Amazon, Walmart, Target, Barnes and Noble, and I'm paying to put a kid through grad school, so pick
Oh
up
my
a
gosh.
copy.
Get a copy. It's expensive out there for school. Come on, you know.
Darren, it's been a pleasure.
Been a pleasure here. Thank you, sir.
Thanks. Take care.